My name is Nadia Bloom. I am 29 years old. On the night my husband's family welcomed me as their own, someone locked me inside a burning car and left me on a country road to die. But I survived. For 2 months, everyone I loved believed I was gone. Yesterday, I came home, and what I found inside my own house made me feel like the ground had opened up beneath my feet all over again. I want to tell you everything, but first, please like this video, subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and leave your country in the comments below. It really means a lot to me. Now let me start from the beginning. I never thought of myself as someone special. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your mother's name and exactly how much your dad paid for his truck. I had a simple life. A good one. I worked as a dental hygienist, rented a small apartment with a leaky faucet I never got fixed, and spent most weekends visiting my mom or hiking with my dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit who believed every stranger was his best friend. I met my husband at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was sitting at the other end of the table and he laughed at something I said. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that makes someone tilt their head back and lose their composure completely. I remember thinking, whoever that is, I like him already. His name was Theodore. Everyone called him Theo. He was 32, an engineer, quiet in a way that felt thoughtful rather than cold. He remembered small things. If I mentioned once that I hated cilantro, he'd already picked it out of the food before I got to the table. If I said I had a hard day, he wouldn't ask 20 questions. He'd just make tea and sit beside me without saying anything. That kind of presence is rare. I fell in love with it quickly. Maybe too quickly. We dated for 14 months. Not a long time, I know that now. But everything felt right. He made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When he proposed, on a Tuesday night, no big production. Just the two of us on the couch watching a terrible movie. I cried before he even finished the question. His family was different from mine. Old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. His father had built a real estate company over 40 years and passed it down to his children. His mother hosted dinner parties with 4 courses and never seemed to sweat. They were polished in a way I wasn't, and sometimes I felt it, that slight tightening in my chest when I didn't know which fork to use. But they were always kind to my face, always warm, and my husband told me not to worry. He said, "They already love you," and I believed him. The wedding was in September. Small, outdoor, strings of light in the trees. My mom cried through the whole ceremony and made everyone laugh during the toast by mentioning my terrible habit of narrating television shows out loud. Theo's family sat in the front row and clapped and smiled. His younger sister caught my eye during the vows and gave me a little wave, like we were already friends. We decided to celebrate with his family that same weekend, a long-standing tradition in their household. A private gathering at the family property. A large house on 40 acres of rural land about 3 hours from the city. His words exactly, just family, simple, relaxed. The first day was exactly that. We ate outside, walked the property, drank wine on the back porch while the sun went down over the fields. Everyone was warm and easy. I remember thinking I'd been wrong to feel nervous about fitting in. I remember thinking, this is my family now. By the second day, something had shifted. Not dramatically, just small things. Conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. His sister glancing at her phone and stepping away. His mother asking me, over coffee, very casually, whether Theo and I had discussed finances yet. I said yes, that we'd been open about everything. She nodded and changed the subject. That night, Theo was quiet at dinner. Not his usual thoughtful quiet, something else. He kept his eyes on his plate. When I reached under the table and put my hand on his, he squeezed it, but then let go too quickly. Later, in the room we were staying in, I asked him if something was wrong. He said no. He kissed me on the forehead and turned off the light. But I lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to the silence of that house, and I felt it again, that small, irrational, impossible-to-name fear that something was not right. The following morning was the last morning I remember clearly for a very long time. Theo told me his father wanted to show him something on the north end of the property and asked if I'd be okay on my own for a couple hours. I said of course. I spent the morning reading on the porch, then decided to drive into the nearest town to get coffee and find a phone charger since mine had stopped working overnight. I borrowed one of the spare cars, a dark blue sedan that his family kept on the property for guests. His mother handed me the keys herself. She smiled. She said, "Drive safe, sweetheart." The road off the property was narrow and winding, surrounded by trees so dense they blocked out most of the sky. I had the radio on. I was thinking about nothing in particular. I was thinking about calling my mom when I got to town. I never made it to town. About 2 miles from the property, the car filled with smoke. I thought at first it was the engine, then I smelled it, sharp and chemical, not mechanical. I tried to open the window. It wouldn't move. I tried the door, locked. Child lock engaged on both rear doors and the driver's side wouldn't release. I am not going to tell you I was calm because I wasn't. I screamed. I kicked the window. I threw my elbow into it 3 times before it cracked and then broke. The smoke was burning my eyes by then. I pulled myself out through the broken window and fell onto the gravel road and rolled away from the car. I lay in the dirt on my back and stared up at the trees and breathed. The car burned behind me for a long time. My hands were cut. My shoulder was wrenched badly from the fall. My vision was blurred from the smoke. I had no phone. No one passed on that road for what felt like an hour. And then, an old pickup slowed and stopped, and a man with a weathered face and kind eyes leaned out and asked if I needed help. His name was Harold. He was 71 years old. He drove me to his house, where his wife cleaned my hands and made me soup and offered me their landline phone. I tried to call Theo. No answer. I tried 3 more times. Nothing. I tried his sister. Straight to voicemail. I want you to understand something. I was sitting at a kitchen table in a stranger's house with blood on my palms, and the people who were supposed to be looking for me were not answering their phones. And even then, I told myself it might be a coincidence. I told myself maybe they were out of range. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were looking for me and just hadn't found signal yet. Harold drove me to the nearest urgent care clinic the next morning. My shoulder was sprained, not broken. My lungs were irritated from the smoke, but okay. The doctor asked how the accident happened. I said the car malfunctioned. I don't know why I said that instead of the truth. Maybe because saying the truth out loud made it real. The clinic didn't have record of anyone searching for a missing woman. No report filed. No calls from the family. Nothing. I stayed with Harold and his wife for 4 days, trying to reach someone. My own phone was gone, burned in the car. I didn't have my purse. I had nothing except the clothes I'd climbed through the window in. I asked Harold to drive me back toward the property once. We got close enough to see the gate. It was locked with a new padlock. The kind you don't use unless you want to make very sure no one gets in. That's when I understood. I can't explain exactly what that moment feels like. The moment you understand that someone who slept next to you and made you tea, and remembered you hated cilantro, made a choice to let you burn. Your brain fights it. It keeps offering you other explanations. There was a malfunction. He doesn't know. He'll be devastated when he finds out. You keep feeding yourself those thoughts like medicine. Because the alternative is something you're not ready to swallow. But the padlock was new. And no one had filed a missing persons report. And no one was answering my calls. I did not go to the police immediately. I know that's the first thing people want to know. Why not? Here is the truth. I was afraid. His father was one of the most well-connected men in that county. He donated money to local campaigns, renovated the community center, had his name on a building at the regional hospital. I was a dental hygienist from Ohio with no wallet, no phone, no ID, and a story that sounded, even to me, like something no one would believe. I needed to be sure first. I needed to know what I was walking into. Harold and his wife, without asking for anything in return, let me stay. They were the kind of people who still believe in helping strangers because it's the right thing to do. I will never stop being grateful for them as long as I live. Over those weeks, I called my mother from Harold's phone. I told her I was alive. I told her not to tell anyone yet. She cried for 20 minutes straight. Then she said, in that quiet voice she gets when she is very serious, "I already knew something was wrong. They told everyone you left." I went still. What? They told people you had an argument after the wedding and you left, that you walked away from the marriage. Your phone's been off for weeks, and when I called Theo the first time, he said you needed space and asked me to respect that. Her voice broke. I should have pushed harder. I should have called the police myself. My husband had told my own mother that I had walked out on our marriage 3 days after our wedding, and she had believed it, not fully, not without doubt, but enough to wait. Because she respected me, because she thought maybe I needed time, because she trusted that I would reach out when I was ready. While she waited, I'd been sleeping in a stranger's guest room 200 miles away with smoke-burned lungs and no shoes. I asked her what had been happening at home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she needed to tell me something, and I could hear in her voice that whatever it was going to cost her to say it. Your sister-in-law called me last week, she said. Not Theo's sister. My sister-in-law. My own brother's wife, a woman named Christine, who had never been warm to me but who I had always tried to like. She called to ask if you'd left anything behind when you moved in with Theo. Specifically, and she was very specific about this, whether you had any paperwork related to your father's life insurance policy. My father had passed away 2 years before I met Theo. He left me a small inheritance, not large by any standard, but mine. I had told Theo about it early in our relationship because I believed in being honest about finances. Hadn't thought much about it after that. I told her I didn't know, my mother said. But Nadia, she knew exactly what to ask for. She wasn't guessing. I sat in Harold's kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear, and I thought about all of it. The way Theo's mother had asked about finances over coffee, the way Christine had known what to look for, the way the car had locked from the inside with a chemical smell that had nothing to do with the engine. I thought about the new padlock on the gate. I spent 2 more weeks gathering what I could from a distance. My mother quietly reached out to a lawyer friend, someone she'd known for years without explaining why. He advised her on what documentation might be useful. She drove to the county records office herself, on her own time, on a Tuesday morning, and pulled everything she was legally allowed to pull. What she found was that Theo had begun the paperwork to access my father's insurance payout within 6 days of my disappearance. Not after a proper mourning period, not after a death certificate, 6 days, with documentation suggesting I had willingly transferred authorization before I left. The signature was not mine. I want to tell you about the day I went back, because it is the part of this story I have replayed the most since it happened. I borrowed clothes from Harold's wife. I borrowed her car. I drove home on a Saturday afternoon in October, 2 months and 4 days after I had climbed through a burning window and fallen onto a gravel road. My hands were healed. My shoulder still ached when it rained. I had the documentation my mother had gathered printed and folded in the inside pocket of my jacket. And sitting in my mother's car, in a public parking lot 2 blocks from the house Theo and I had shared, was a detective named Bryce Okafor from the county sheriff's office, who my mother had contacted 3 days earlier and who had spent those 3 days doing his own quiet verification. I did not go in alone. I was never going to go in alone. We pulled up to the house at 4 p.m. The lights were on. There were 2 cars in the driveway. One was Theo's. The other I recognized as Christine's. Detective Okafor knocked on the door. The look on Theo's face when it opened, I've thought about it many times. It wasn't the look of a man who had been grieving. It wasn't the look of a man who had been searching. It was the look of a man who had been comfortable. And then it was the look of a man who understood that whatever he had counted on had just failed him completely. He said my name. Just my name. Once. Very quietly. I stepped into the light where he could see me clearly and I said, I remember everything, Theo. The car, the locks, the smoke, all of it. Christine came around the corner from the kitchen and stopped cold in the doorway. Behind me, Detective Okafor identified himself and explained that he had a warrant. What happened in the next 20 minutes, I can only describe as a controlled implosion. Theo stopped speaking entirely. Christine tried twice to say something, and both times her voice failed her. My mother, who had been waiting at the end of the driveway, walked up slowly and stood beside me and said nothing. Just stood there. Just that. The falsified signature was the cornerstone. Combined with the car, which investigators had already located and had begun examining for evidence of deliberate tampering, and phone records that placed Christine at the property on the morning I disappeared, it built a picture that was difficult to argue against. Theo's father's name appeared in the financial documentation. Christine's handwriting was on the transferred authorization form. They had all been counting on the simplest possible cover that I had chosen to leave. That I was the kind of woman who would walk away from her own marriage, go silent, and never come back to fight for herself. They had built an entire assumption on the idea that I was easy to erase. They were wrong about that. I stood in the driveway of the house I had lived in and watched the detective speak to Theo with the measured, unhurried patience of someone who already has everything he needs. I watched Christine sit down on the porch steps and put her face in her hands. I watched my mother keep her hand on my back without saying a word. I thought about Harold and his wife, and the soup she made me, and the phone she let me use, and the way he'd driven a stranger to urgent care without asking a single question about what had happened. I thought about all the mornings I had woken up in their guest room and stared at the ceiling and made myself say, out loud into the empty room, I am still here. I am still here. I lost the life I thought I was building, the house, the marriage, the family I believed I was joining. All of it was false, built on what they wanted from me, not on who I was. That took a long time to sit with. Some days it still does. But I want to be honest about the other side of it because I think it matters. I found out I can climb through a burning window. I found out I can survive 2 months with nothing and still come home standing. I found out my mother would go to the county records office on a Tuesday morning just because something felt wrong to her, without any proof, without any explanation, just because she knew me well enough to trust her instincts about my life. And I found out there are still people like Harold in the world. People who stop. The case is ongoing. I'm not going to share details about what comes next because my lawyer has advised me not to. But I am here and I am okay. And I am telling this story because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in a stranger's kitchen with nothing, telling themselves it might still be a coincidence. It might not be. Trust what you know. And if you can't go to the people who are supposed to protect you, find a Harold. They exist. I promise you they exist. I keep thinking about the padlock. Not the fire, not the smoke, not even the moment I understood what Theo had done. The padlock is the image that stays with me. Brand new. Placed there so I couldn't come back. It's such a small, practical thing. A piece of metal, a few dollars at a hardware store, and yet it told me everything I needed to know about who those people were and what they believed about me. They believed I was someone you could simply lock out, that I would disappear quietly and stay disappeared. What they didn't account for was Harold. I think about that a lot, too. The fact that one person stopping on a road changed the entire outcome of this story. He didn't know me. He didn't owe me anything. He just looked at a woman lying in the dirt next to a burning car and decided that was enough reason to stop. That's not a small thing. That's actually one of the most important things I've ever witnessed up close. The way a single decent choice made by a stranger can be the difference between someone surviving and someone not. The people who hurt me were smart in a certain way. They understood systems, financial documents, family influence, the weight a trusted name carries in a small county. They planned carefully. But they made one fundamental mistake, and it wasn't tactical. It was moral. When you build something on the belief that another person doesn't matter, that she can be used and then removed, you've already made yourself fragile in a way you can't see. Because that belief is wrong. And reality has a way of correcting it. My mother drove to a government records office on a Tuesday morning because something felt wrong to her. She had no proof. She had no legal expertise. She had nothing except the knowledge that she raised a daughter who would not simply vanish without a word and mean it. That quiet intelligence, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just pays attention and acts, is what actually dismantled everything they'd constructed. Not a dramatic confrontation, a Tuesday morning and a records request. I want to be honest about what the hard part really was. It wasn't the fire, and it wasn't the 2 months of recovery. And it wasn't even standing in that driveway watching Theo's face change. The hard part was the weeks in Harold's guest room when I didn't know yet if anyone would believe me. When the story I had to tell sounded, even to me, like something a person might dismiss. I had to choose, every single morning, to keep going anyway. To stay sharp. To not let the fear of not being believed stop me from gathering what I needed to be believed. That discipline, staying clear-headed when everything in you wants to fall apart, is something I didn't know I had until I needed it. I'm not the same person who borrowed a car from a family I thought was mine and drove down a tree-lined road thinking about calling her mom. I don't think I could be, even if I wanted to. But I'll tell you what I am. I'm someone who climbed out of a burning window. Someone who spent 2 months building a case instead of crumbling. Someone whose mother loved her well enough to act on instinct alone. Whatever they thought they were locking out with that padlock, she got back in anyway.